Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a company that fundamentally changed how we travel, how we view property, and frankly, how we define neighborhood living.
We are.
We are talking about Airbnb, Inc.
Hmm.
It's the platform that convinced millions of people, globally, that renting out a spare room or their entire home was a viable business model.
It's long past the spare room stage, though. I mean,
Yeah.
Airbnb is a genuine global powerhouse now.
Oh, absolutely.
It's traded on the NASDAQ, and it's a component of the S&P 500.
Yeah.
And, when a company reaches that level, it's not a disruptive startup anymore.
No.
It's a pillar of the lodging industry, a pillar that is constantly being battered by regulatory scrutiny, political upheaval, and some really intense ethical storms all over the world.
Exactly. The scale is it's staggering. If you look at the financials from 2024, they reported $11.1 billion in revenue
Billion, with a B.
with a net income of $2.65 billion. Just think about that for a second. A net income in the billions. Their total assets hit $20.9 billion.
And they generate all that with a remarkably lean structure.
It's amazing. Only about 7,300 employees globally. They're essentially a broker, right? Just taking a significant commission on every single booking.
And that model brokerage, that's the key to understanding both their success and, well, their problems.
How so?
They don't own the assets, they own the marketplace. The company, which was founded back in August 2008 in San Francisco by Brian Chesky, Joe Gebbia, and Nathan Blecharczyk, it built its entire identity around decentralizing hospitality.
But our mission today is to go far beyond just checking the financial boxes or, summarizing the basics.
Right.
If you really want to be well informed on Airbnb, you need to understand the complexity of its global regulatory web, how it manages these intense ethical controversies around housing and safety.
And how sudden geopolitical shifts like the ones in China and Russia force these massive billion-dollar business decisions.
We're examining the full spectrum, from the brilliant, almost absurd origins of the company
To the complex legal battles it fights daily in cities from Rome to New York. We're looking for the surprising facts and the clear, necessary context that will give you, the listener, instant expertise on this giant of the sharing economy.
So let's start at the beginning, because the origin story is a pure Silicon Valley hustle, and it's certainly unconventional. The story starts not with $1 million seed fund, but, well, quite literally, with a handful of air mattresses.
That's right.
Back in October 2007, roommates Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, who were old schoolmates, they had just moved to San Francisco.
And they were designers, ambitious guys, but they were also, struggling to afford the rent. San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in the U.S.
So desperation breeds innovation.
As the saying goes, they needed cash, and they needed it fast. So what did they do? They put 3 air mattresses right there in their living room.
And just marketed the space as a makeshift temporary bed and breakfast.
Exactly, for travelers coming into the city.
What turned this, this temporary necessity into a multi-billion-dollar concept was a serendipitous event in the summer of 2008.
Ah, yes, the Industrial Design Conference. Specifically, the one hosted by the Industrial Designers Society of America. It hit town, and it just completely saturated the San Francisco hotel market.
The city literally ran out of rooms.
It did. Travelers were scrambling for any available lodging. They would have taken anything, even a shared space on an air mattress. And that's when Chesky and Gebbia had their light bulb moment.
They realized the genuine, immediate market demand for this kind of unconventional temporary housing, especially around major events.
They had discovered a clear market inefficiency.
And that's when they got serious. They brought in their third co-founder, Nathan Blecharczyk, who was Chesky's former roommate, in February 2008. He was the CTO.
The tech guy.
The tech guy. And they launched the site, ArbDanBreakfast.com, on August 11, 2008. It was designed specifically to catch that first wave of customers who were struggling to find rooms during that big conference.
So they solved an immediate problem. But even with that successful launch, they were still short on capital. Which leads us to the most infamous part of their origin story, their funding strategy.
You mentioned the hustle, and this truly defines it.
It really does.
You would naturally assume a successful tech company raises seed capital from angel investors or VCs, right out of the gate.
But they didn't.
No. They famously raised their initial crucial $30,000 by selling election-themed cereal boxes.
Yes, cereal boxes. They took the election fever of 2008 and they packaged it.
Literally.
Literally. They created these commemorative boxes named after the two candidates, Barack Obama and John McCain, calling them Obama O's and Captain McCain's.
And they actually commissioned artists to create the artwork. They designed these boxes to look like real, novelty breakfast foods. This wasn't some small-scale joke.
No, it was a serious physical product launch. They sold them, largely at the 2008 Democratic National Convention, for $40 a box.
$40.
And this audacious stunt, this sheer entrepreneurial creativity, it generated $30,000. That cash infusion was their lifeline. It gave them just enough runway to keep the business alive and keep refining their model.
And that hustle, it also got them the crucial attention of Paul Graham.
The influential computer programmer and co-founder of Y Combinator.
Exactly. In January 2009, Graham invited them to the prestigious winter training session of his startup incubator.
And Y Combinator, it provided the structure, the training, and $20,000 in funding in exchange for a 6% interest in the company.
But the most valuable detail here is what they did with that money.
Right. Instead of just funneling it into more website development, they realized their biggest weakness was that they didn't understand their customer.
So they used that investment, the one that was supposed to be for growth, to fly to New York.
Why New York?
To meet the people actually using their service. They stayed in their own listings, they talked to hosts, they took photos, they truly experienced their own product from the ground up.
And that boots-on-the-ground research was transformative.
Totally. When they returned to San Francisco, they didn't just have a functional platform anymore. They had a validated, profitable business model ready to present to West Coast investors.
By March 2009, they had 10,000 users and 2,500 listings. Things were moving fast.
And crucially, that same month, they shortened the name
to the snappyairbnb.com,
which wisely eliminated that lingering confusion over whether guests were actually required to sleep on an air mattress.
A smart brand refinement. It marked their move beyond the novelty phase.
From there, they just kept iterating and growing. They won the App Award at the huge South by Southwest conference in March 2011, which really established their credentials as a mobile-first platform ready for rapid corporate expansion.
And that expansion, it quickly moved beyond just hosting. By July 2014, they unveiled major design revisions, including that famous new logo, the bellow.
The one that was meant to symbolize belonging.
Right. And they also started aggressively targeting business travelers, a really high-yield market, by partnering with Concur, a major expense reporting service.
That signaled their intent to compete directly with traditional hotels for corporate accounts.
The key word here is diversification. It accelerated dramatically in the mid to late 2010s. In November 2016, they launched Experiences,
which moved them into the broader travel activity market.
Exactly. They weren't just selling beds anymore. They were selling curated itineraries, local tours, cooking classes. They wanted to capture the entire travel wallet.
And they started classifying their homes, right, to appeal to higher-end and more specific segments.
Yes. In February 2018, they launched Airbnb Plus, which featured homes that were vetted for quality of services, comfort design standards.
Basically their version of a 4-star hotel property.
Pretty much. And right alongside that, they launched Beyond by Airbnb, which focused specifically on the truly luxurious end of the market. High-end vacation rentals, curated experiences, that sort of thing.
They were quickly becoming a full-spectrum hospitality company that could compete with boutique hotels and villa rental agencies.
And to show you the sheer breadth of their vision, by 2019, they were even producing and financing documentaries.
Through their content division, Roush Street Films. I remember Gay Chorus Deep South.
That was one of them. And it demonstrated they were building a brand identity that extended far beyond transactional lodging. They were aiming for cultural relevance. #33, growth, geopolitics, and financial resilience. That incredible expansion we just reviewed, it wasn't purely organic growth. Not at all.
It was accelerated by highly strategic mergers and acquisitions, M&A.
Exactly. And when you analyze the companies Airbnb acquired, you see a clear roadmap. They identified specific areas where they lacked expertise or market penetration, and then they just bought the solution.
So what does that roadmap look like? Where did they focus their acquisition energy at first?
The focus was on 3 primary areas, and they mirrored their business strategy. First up was geographic expansion.
Makes sense.
To quickly establish an international footprint, they bought their German competitor, Acolio, in 2011. That immediately gave them their first international office in Hamburg.
And then the UK.
Then, in 2012, they acquired CrashPatter, a UK competitor, which instantly added 6,000 international listings and made Airbnb the largest lodging website in the UK pretty much overnight.
So they weren't just buying beds, they were buying immediate market share. bypassing the whole lengthy process of building local host communities from scratch.
Precisely. The second focus was on experience and local knowledge.
The ability to be a full travel curator, not just a booking platform.
You got it. They picked up Nabewise, an online city guide, in 2012 to offer hyperlocal recommendations, and then LocalMind, a location-based Q&A platform, later that year.
And that focus really solidified in 2016 when they bought Trip4Real.
A travel activities marketplace. It proved their commitment to that experiences vertical was real.
And the third area was all about capturing the high-value market, right? Luxury and corporate travel, which demand higher standards and more reliable service.
That's where the major money went. In 2017, they bought Luxury Retreats International, a Canadian villa rental company, for $300 million in cash and stock. It immediately boosted their offerings to the ultra-wealthy. Then came two critical acquisitions in 2019. First, Hotel Tonight.
The last-minute hotel booking service, I've used that.
For $400 million. It targeted spontaneous travelers and competed directly with hotel apps. And to nail down the business travel segment, they acquired Urbandor that same year.
Urbandor specialized in extended stays for corporate clients.
A crucial move. It allowed Airbnb to tailor its inventory and services to the strict standards and long-term needs of major companies, something the traditional hotel sector excels at.
And looking forward.
Reflecting their forward view, in November 2023, they acquired GamePlanner.ai, an AI startup. It indicates a clear focus on integrating artificial intelligence into their platform's search and recommendation capabilities.
They had incredible momentum, but then no one saw the COVID-19 pandemic coming.
No one did.
They went from expansion to an existential threat almost overnight.
The shock was profound. Bookings in major urban centers dropped by as much as 96% in the initial months of the 2020 pandemic.
96%. That's nearly a complete market collapse. It just highlights their vulnerability to global travel shutdown.
It does. But they showed an interesting financial resilience, didn't they?
They did. While the urban bookings vanished, rural and remote area bookings actually rose. People were seeking socially distanced retreats, escapes from crowded cities.
And their response was swift and strategic. First, they prioritized host loyalty.
The $250 million pledge.
Pledge to hosts to compensate for pandemic-related guest cancellations. They acknowledged that maintaining their supply side was paramount. Secondly, they made tough internal cuts.
Layoffs of about 1,900 employees. That was about 25% of their total workforce across the Americas, Europe, and Asia.
They had to reduce overhead and secure liquidity.
And despite that near-death experience, they still made the massive leap to the public market late that year.
They absolutely did. Their initial public offering, their IPO, took place on December 10, 2020. They listed on NASDAQ under the ticker ABNB.
And it was a huge success.
A massive financial success, raising $3.5 billion. It was also a landmark moment for the gig economy. And in a great nod to their community, they offered shares valued at $238 million directly to their platform hosts.
At the offering price of $68 per share.
Integrating them directly into the company's financial success.
Okay, let's pivot to the fascinating geopolitical exits they've had to execute. This really connects their growth directly to global politics and ethics.
In 2022, they started making some major strategic withdrawals. The Russian invasion of Ukraine led them to immediately suspend business in Russia and Belarus in March 2022.
Adhering to international sanctions, taking a clear public stance.
Right. But the exit from China, where they ceased domestic operations in May 2022, that was far more complex and politically charged.
So why pull out of a market with such immense potential?
It was multi-layered. China's persistent zero-COVID policy made travel unpredictable, severely restricting tourism, making investment risky. But the deeper reason, the more principled reason, involved China's extensive legal demands for data.
And this is our critical data alert. When a global platform is compelled to share guest information, it immediately raises massive privacy, surveillance, and human rights concerns.
Indeed. And this was an internal ethical flashpoint. We know that a former FBI deputy director executive who had joined Airbnb, he resigned in 2019 specifically over concerns about Airbnb's willingness to share this kind of data with the Chinese government.
What was the accusation?
That the policy effectively enabled state tracking and surveillance. It put the company in an untenable position, right? Choosing between access to a massive market and global ethical standards.
And the ethical scrutiny in China wasn't just limited to data.
No. They were also criticized for allowing listings on land owned by the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, a sanctioned Chinese paramilitary entity directly involved in the persecution of the Uyghur population.
And there were also reports in 2019 that certain hosts in China were actively refusing to rent to Uyghur travelers.
Forcing Airbnb to grapple with discrimination issues on a hyperlocal scale while trying to manage these sensitive state relations. The decision to exit domestic operations shows they decided that the regulatory and ethical cost of doing business there had just become too high.
So given these significant exits, where is Airbnb making its money today? What's the geographic breakdown of that $11.1 billion 2024 revenue?
The breakdown shows a heavy reliance on established Western markets. North America is still their largest base. It accounts for 45.1% of revenue.
Which is roughly $5.01 billion. So close to half their revenue is from the U.S. and Canada.
Correct. But the second largest market is that massive region of Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, what we call EEME.
And that sector brings in
37.3% or $4.14 billion. So, roughly 4 out of every $10 they earn comes from European travel.
And the remaining revenue.
It's split pretty evenly between Asia Pacific at 8.9%, or about $1.9 million, and Latin America at 8.7%, or $4.97 billion.
So the takeaway for you, the listener, is that while Airbnb is a U.S.-founded company, its profitability and its resilience rely fundamentally on the massive and often highly regulated European travel market.
Which takes us directly into the regulatory conflicts they face daily. #IV, navigating the global regulatory maze.
The defining struggle for Airbnb, maybe more than any financial or safety issue, is navigating this maze of regulations for short-term rentals.
It really is.
And it's because every city, sometimes every neighborhood, has a different set of rules.
What's fascinating here is that the foundation of this challenge is pretty simple. It's economics and protectionism. Traditional lodging hotels, they're subject to extremely stringent rules.
Business licenses, health and safety standards, paying hotel taxes, compliance with zoning. The list goes on.
Exactly. And Airbnb, by positioning itself initially as this casual sharing economy platform, it just sidestepped all of those rules, which gave them an enormous competitive advantage.
And that led to fierce, well-funded lobbying by the established hotel industry for stricter, often punitive, regulations targeting home-sharing platforms.
Right. They argue, and it's accurate, that Airbnb is running an unregulated hotel business in residential zones.
And it's not just government legislation. We should remind you that in the U.S., many homeowner associations, HOAs, they also severely limit or just outright ban short-term rentals in their communities.
But acting as a hyper-local enforcement mechanism, absolutely. When we look at Europe, the most common regulatory tool is the strict day limit,
which is intended to stop commercial investors from pulling properties off the long-term rental market and turning them into full-time hotels.
It keeps properties as primary residences. That's the goal.
So let's run through the map of European restrictions because they are incredibly specific and they directly impact business models.
Okay, starting with Paris, a massive tourism hub. Hosts there are capped at a maximum of 120 days per year.
And they have to register.
They must register their listing with the town hall. That 120-day mark is specifically designed to make it financially impossible for a commercial entity to run a property 365 days a year.
London imposes a similar limit, right? 90 days annually.
And Amsterdam is even tighter, a 30-night per year limit. And they've gone a step further, banning short-term rentals outright in certain heavily impacted parts of the city center.
To contain disruption and maintain neighborhood character.
Ireland provides a great example of the tension between regulation and enforcement. Primary residences there are restricted to a maximum of 90 days per year.
And the critical legal point is that if a host wants to change the property's use to a full-time rental, a commercial enterprise, they need planning permission from local authorities.
But what was the finding on compliance?
Minimal, to the point of being negligible. A study found that out of 25,000 properties listed on various platforms, only 38 actually had the required planning permission.
38. That just highlights the operational challenge for governments trying to enforce these laws against a decentralized platform.
We're also seeing cities get extremely specific to target certain types of commercial activity. Madrid, for example.
Madrid bans listings that don't have a private entrance, which effectively eliminates shared apartments or listings carved out of larger residential buildings.
And then you have the really radical actions.
Like Palma de Mallorca, a popular Mediterranean tourist destination. They took a drastic step to contain over-tourism and banned home-sharing sites entirely across the city.
Wow. A total ban.
Vienna has taken a more surgical approach, banning short-term rentals in specific residential zones, though they do exempt properties that serve as the host's primary residence.
And Rome found a way to make Airbnb an active participant in revenue collection.
Precisely. In Rome, the platforms themselves have to withhold a substantial 21% rental income tax from the host's payouts before the money even reaches them.
Which makes the platform an agent of the government's tax authority, something Airbnb fights fiercely all over the world.
The United States offers an equally varied picture. The focus here is more on host presence and required licensing.
And New York City is maybe the most restrictive major market.
They're aiming to return housing stock to long-term residents. So rentals under 30 days are prohibited unless the host is physically present on the property.
Plus, hosts are required to get a license, but the city has made it notoriously difficult to get one.
They've issued very few. This rule essentially makes most full-time investor-owned short-term rentals illegal.
Los Angeles is a little different, but still highly structured.
In LA, hosts must register with the city, pay an $89 fee, and they are capped at 120 home-sharing days per calendar year.
And Seattle limits rentals not just by time, but by volume.
Right. Hosts have to get licenses, and they can't rent more than 2 units. This specifically targets large-scale investment firms trying to buy up multiple properties.
And then there are the total bans, like in West New York, New Jersey.
The municipality there adopted an ordinance banning short-term rentals completely after intense community complaints about noise, traffic, housing shortages.
This patchwork of legislation must be an operational nightmare. And the contrast is striking because while most major U.S. cities are tightening the screws, Phoenix, Arizona has gone to the opposite extreme.
In Phoenix, state legislation preempted the cities. Municipalities are prohibited from interfering with property owners' rights to rent out their homes short-term.
Which gives platforms like Airbnb free rein.
It's an ideological split, really. Property rights versus housing stability. That's what defines the U.S. regulatory landscape.
And we see similar protective measures in Canada and Asia.
In Toronto and Vancouver, rentals have to be in the host's primary residence, and a license is required. Again, it's aimed at preventing investment properties from dominating the market.
And in Asia.
Singapore is maybe the toughest jurisdiction. Short-term home rentals under 3 months are simply illegal. Japan allows more flexibility, but hosts have to register their listing with the government, and properties are capped at a maximum of 180 rental days per year.
So if you look at the common thread across all these regions, it's clear.
Governments are trying to stop Airbnb from operating as a completely unregulated commercial entity in residential spaces. The goal is registration, restriction, and taxation, VAFE, criticism, and the Airbnb effect on communities. While navigating that regulatory maze is a constant necessity, the most intense social and economic criticism Airbnb faces revolves around its profound and often negative impact on housing affordability.
In desirable areas especially, this phenomenon has been famously dubbed the Airbnb effect.
Yes.
So let's define that simply for you, the listener. What exactly is the mechanism of the Airbnb effect?
It's simple supply and demand, really, but translated into social disruption. When long-term residential properties are converted into high-yield short-term tourist accommodation.
It reduces the overall pool of housing available to local residents.
Exactly. Every home that becomes a full-time Airbnb is one less apartment for a local worker or a family or a student.
And multiple studies have confirmed that this reduction in long-term supply contributes directly to rising rental prices in those neighborhoods. It just prices out established residents.
Yes. And this is often made worse by predatory and illegal actions. There are widespread accusations that some landlords illegally evict their existing long-term tenants.
Just so they can convert their properties into these lucrative, high-rate Airbnb listings?
Which promise a much higher return than a traditional lease.
And even the data around this critical economic issue is controversial.
The watchdog site, Inside Airbnb, has accused the company of actively manipulating its public data to portray a less negative effect on housing supply than is actually the case. The conflict isn't just about prices, it's about systemic transparency.
Moving beyond local economics, Airbnb has repeatedly stepped onto global geopolitical and ethical landmines.
This is a platform built on global exchange, and that means engaging with the world's most complicated contracts.
The situation involving Israeli settlements in the West Bank is a prime example of their internal struggle to balance corporate policy with global ethical consensus. In 2018, they made a huge announcement.
That announcement was that they would remove approximately 200 listings located in the West Bank settlements.
which are a major flashpoint of dispute between Israelis and Palestinians and are often deemed illegal under international law.
Right. But that policy, which was lauded by human rights groups, it didn't survive long.
Why the reversal?
Property owners filed lawsuits in both Israel and the United States. They alleged discrimination based on place of residence and origin.
And facing that intense legal pressure, Airbnb reversed the ban in April 2019.
They chose a compromise instead.
Oh,
They pledged to donate all profits generated from those specific listings to humanitarian nonprofits.
but compromising often means satisfying no one.
Exactly. The company was still included on a 2020 UN Human Rights Council list of companies operating in settlements involved in activities that raise particular human rights concerns. Their attempt to navigate this massive ethical issue through financial donation rather than outright policy change.
Oh.
It just showed the difficulty of setting universal standards.
And the scrutiny extends back to their dealings with China. Beyond the data sharing concerns we talked about, they've been criticized for allowing listings on land owned by the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps.
A sanctioned paramilitary entity involved in the systemic persecution of Uyghurs.
And in the run-up to the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, human rights groups actively requested that Airbnb drop its corporate sponsorship.
Specifically citing alleged human rights violations by the Chinese government against the Uyghurs and in Hong Kong. Airbnb, along with 14 other leading corporate sponsors, ultimately ignored those requests. They prioritized their association with the high-profile global event.
What's also fascinating is the platform's selective enforcement when it comes to extremism. Sometimes they act swiftly, and other times they face intense criticism for inaction.
They do show a willingness to act on internal policy. For example, in August 2017, they canceled numerous bookings and closed the accounts of identified attendees of the white supremacist Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville.
Citing their clear anti-discrimination policies, that was a firm public statement.
It was. But just a few years later, in January 2021, they were heavily criticized for allowing participants in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol to book units in the Washington metropolitan area.
Even as local hotels were taking proactive steps to ban groups of far-right extremists.
It was a huge political misstep. It forced them to take drastic measures after the fact, banning all bookings in the entire Washington area prior to the inauguration of Joe Biden to prevent further violence.
And the concerns about their internal approach to extremism, they haven't gone away. There were significant whistleblower claims recently, weren't there?
Yes. In May 2024, a former contractor alleged in a highly publicized whistleblower complaint that the company had weakened its internal policies against extremists and had dissolved the specialized team responsible for removing them.
And Airbnb's response?
They publicly denied the claims, but the fact that these allegations surfaced highlights that constant tension between maintaining an open platform and ensuring community safety.
The scrutiny even reached the company's founders and their involvement in U.S. government politics. We should probably define the DOJ controversy for you, which seems to have sparked widespread boycott calls.
Certainly. In 2025, co-founder and current board member Joe Gebbia was appointed to the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, by the incoming administration.
And DOGE is typically designed to cut bureaucratic fat and streamline government operations using tech industry principles.
Right, but critics saw this appointment, given Gebbia's background, as potentially problematic.
Why did this lead to claims that he undermined U.S. democracy?
The criticism was highly political. Opponents argued that putting a tech executive with a known history of fighting government regulations specifically for Airbnb into a position to fundamentally restructure government efficiency, well, it created an unacceptable conflict of interest.
So the claim was he was using government resources to undermine the very regulations that tried to restrict platforms like Airbnb.
That was the perception, that it gave the sharing economy a direct hand in shaping the regulatory environment, potentially undermining democratic processes that protect housing and neighborhoods. And that led to widespread, high-profile boycott calls.
Which makes the connection between the company's reputation and the actions of its founders much clearer. Now, we mentioned the hotel industry lobbying earlier, and their constant critique remains a significant headwind.
The hotel industry constantly argues that Airbnb benefits from competitive effects because they aren't subject to the same strict, fair and equal regulations.
Things like fire codes, accessibility standards, local taxation.
Exactly. And that critique is what primarily fuels the local regulatory battles we discussed earlier.
And finally, a piece of purely consumer-driven criticism that seems to counter their status as a major travel player.
The lack of a loyalty program.
It's a major point of consumer frustration, isn't it?
It is. Airbnb remains one of the few major global travel companies that operates without a loyalty program, unlike every major hotel chain and airline.
Why is that?
The industry consensus is that this omission is partly because its business customer base is still limited compared to traditional hotels, which use loyalty programs to capture consistent, high-yield corporate travel. If you're a traveler earning points for every flight and hotel stay, skipping that for Airbnb means leaving value on the table. Hashtag DCs. Legal issues and critical safety gaps.
We now turn to what is arguably the most critical area of controversy: the legal issues and the very real safety and trust gaps that threaten the foundational premise of the sharing economy.
Right. And while Airbnb is quick to note that statistically, these incidents are not significant relative to the billions of bookings.
The reported stories are disturbing, and they reveal systemic problems.
The list of reported incidents involving host misconduct is certainly alarming. It ranges from financial fraud to outright violent crime.
Guests have reported last-minute cancellations, leaving them stranded, finding mold or rodent-infested lodging, experiencing theft.
And tragically, facing invasion of privacy and even violent crimes like rape and murder.
And we keep seeing the same types of financial scams resurface, like the classic bait and switch.
Where guests arrive to find they've been given accommodation that is fundamentally different, often worse than the promised listing. It's a clear case of fraud.
This brings us to a critical area of scrutiny: host background checks. A July 2024 investigation by CNN highlighted a massive and very uncomfortable safety gap in Airbnb's public promises.
The company includes some significant disclaimers in its policies.
How does that disclaimer language protect them while potentially endangering guests?
It states that background checks should not be relied upon to identify all past criminal convictions or sex offender registrations.
Wait, say that again?
They essentially tell users that the check is not comprehensive and should not be treated as a guarantee of safety.
So this means that convictions for extremely severe crimes like murder, rape, terrorism, or child molestation are not automatic disqualifiers for a host, or could be missed by their system. How can they possibly defend a policy that allows them to market trust while simultaneously disclaiming responsibility for the most severe criminal risks?
They argue that they rely on third-party data providers whose systems are inherently limited by jurisdictional data access and laws. But the result is a platform built on the premise of trusting a stranger that contains these massive built-in safety gaps. It fundamentally contradicts the message of safety and security they promote.
And the most persistent invasion of privacy issue, one that completely undermines the idea of a private rental space, is the hidden camera crisis.
It is a pervasive problem. There have been numerous well-publicized incidents of hosts secretly recording their guests, often placing cameras in private areas like bedrooms and bathrooms.
It got so widespread that publications like The Washington Post and Fast Company actually published extensive guides teaching guests how to sweep their Airbnb to find hidden cameras.
The fact that you need a guide on hidden camera self-defense tells you everything you need to know about the scale of the threat.
And what's deeply troubling is the company's historical response to these complaints.
A 2023 deposition that surfaced in court revealed that an Airbnb employee testified that the company does not notify law enforcement as a matter of standard practice when a hidden camera complaint is raised.
They don't call the police.
They only conduct internal inquiries, often just shutting down the listing and refunding the guest.
So they are essentially investigating potential criminal acts internally, but actively withholding immediate evidence from the police. How do they justify that?
Their justification, presumably, is to control the narrative and manage the incident internally. But law enforcement experts have been scathing.
I can imagine.
They argue that this practice actively hinders criminal investigations. It gives suspects valuable time to destroy evidence-erased footage, remove the equipment before police can secure a search warrant. The CNN investigation concluded that Airbnb consistently fails to protect its guests and that its strategies are aimed more at distancing itself from legal responsibility for safety.
It seems like they were finally forced to act publicly on the camera issue, though.
They were. In March 2024, Airbnb announced a significant, long-overdue policy change: a total ban on indoor cameras in properties listed on the site, effective April 30, 2024.
And that change also mandated that hosts must disclose the use of any noise decibel monitoring equipment.
which is often used to enforce their party ban. It's a step toward accountability. But the larger legal fight over data sharing with governments for regulatory enforcement, that spans continents.
In the U.S., Airbnb initially fiercely contested local laws that required them to provide guest information to New York City.
Arguing it was an invasive overreach. But they eventually compromised.
Yes. In May 2019, they settled. They agreed to turn over anonymized data for about 17,000 listings.
Which allows the city to pursue illegal rentals without immediately compromising individual guest privacy. Similar settlements were reached in major markets like Boston and Miami. It shows a consistent strategy of resisting, then eventually conceding, limited data to major U.S. cities.
And the same tension played out in the EU, which has a much stricter view on data privacy.
In Belgium, Airbnb contested a law requiring them to provide tax authorities with the full particulars of tourist transactions, claiming it was incompatible with stricter European Union law.
And the European Court of Justice, the highest court in the EU, addressed this in April 2022.
And it was a major victory for regulators. The ECJ ruled that the requirement to transmit transaction data to tax authorities was indeed compatible with EU law.
Which set a crucial precedent.
It did. It makes it far harder for Airbnb to claim EU privacy protection against national tax authorities.
We should also touch on consumer protection concerns around the review system. It's supposed to be objective, but the pressure in a peer-to-peer system seems to undermine that.
The design is theoretically sound. Reviews are hidden until both the guest and the host submit their rating, or the time expires. This is supposed to remove the fear of immediate negative retaliation.
But it's undermined by the guest's very real concern about future bookings. Because if you leave a legitimately critical review, a host can then see that history and just refuse to accommodate you in the future, right?
Exactly. The potential for being labeled a difficult guest affects your ability to book through the platform in the future. It chills your willingness to be impartial or critical. You're incentivized to leave positive or neutral feedback to ensure your continued access to the platform.
Which skews the entire impartiality of the review system. And finally, a very expensive legal complication surfaced in the Netherlands regarding their fundamental business model.
In March 2020, a court ruling found that Airbnb charging service fees to both the host and the guest was illegal under Dutch consumer protection law.
Essentially an illicit double commission.
Right. And this decision potentially entitled 30,000 guests to reimbursement for those fees, forcing Airbnb to file countersuits to gain clarity and limit the financial exposure. It just shows how local consumer protection laws can strike right at the heart of the platform's global revenue model. #tag7. Conclusion.
So what does this all mean? We have followed Airbnb from 3 roommates needing rent money and selling $30,000 worth of election-themed cereal boxes,
all the way to a $11.1 billion annual revenue powerhouse that competes with the world's largest hotel chains.
It means Airbnb is the definitive case study of disruptive innovation and massive rapid scaling, but it is simultaneously defined by persistent conflict.
It's a company that constantly adapts. You see it with their permanent party ban instituted in 2022, now enforced by sophisticated noise detection technology. But it is also constantly wrestling with established global regulations.
From day limit restrictions in Paris and London, intended to protect housing stock, to total bans in places like Palma de Mallorca and West New York, New Jersey, intended to protect neighborhood character.
The learner takeaway for you here is that you now have the full spectrum of their modern existence. You understand how their success fundamentally pressures housing markets, the Airbnb effect, and the intense scrutiny they face regarding ethical landmines.
Whether those are in Israeli settlements, over human rights in China, or critically, over host misconduct and the massive safety gaps, particularly around the hidden camera crisis and the acknowledged limitations of their host background checks.
They are operating in the space where tech speed meets local governance, and conflict is just. It's inevitable.
This brings us to the final provocative thought, which I think summarizes the essential paradox of the sharing economy.
Back in 2014, linguists analyzing the company's legal documents noted that Airbnb's terms of service, privacy policy, and other legal agreements totaled over 55,000 words.
The length of a short novel.
Right. And despite requiring users to agree to this vast, complex document that governs everything from cancellations to liability, the company relies heavily on disclaimers regarding fundamental things like host background checks. And it often distances itself from notifying law enforcement about serious safety violations.
So, if a platform is built on transparency and the simple, seamless exchange of trust between strangers,
And yet its actual operations are governed by a novel-length contract that allows it to rely on comprehensive disclaimers rather than safety guarantees.
how can a global platform truly manage the complexities of safety and local governance while retaining the simple, trust-based ethos it was founded upon?
That tension between simplicity and complex corporate liability is the challenge that will define Airbnb's future growth.